The transport ship docked with a soft thud that Marcus Chen barely felt through his boots. He pressed his face against the window, trying to get his first real look at the Galactic Wildlife Conservation Station. It was bigger than he expected, a sprawling structure that wrapped around itself like a metal flower in the darkness of space. Behind it, the gas giant Thesara Prime filled half the view with swirling bands of orange and purple. Marcus grabbed his bag and headed for the airlock. His hands were shaking a little. He was the first human to work at this station, the first human the Varixen had ever invited to join their conservation program. It was a huge honor, and he was terrified of messing it up. The airlock opened with a hiss. On the other side stood a Varixen, tall and elegant, with scales that shimmered like oil on water. The alien moved with a grace that made Marcus feel clumsy just watching. "Dr. Chen," the Varixen said, bowing slightly, "I am Senior Conservator Thelix. Welcome to our station." Marcus tried to bow back and nearly dropped his bag. "Thank you. I'm excited to be here." Thelix's eyes were large and golden, with pupils that narrowed to slits. Those eyes watched Marcus with what might have been amusement. "Come. I will show you to your quarters first. Then we will begin your orientation. We have much to show you." The station was impressive. Thelix led Marcus through corridors lined with windows that looked out into carefully controlled habitats. Marcus saw creatures he'd only read about in textbooks, aliens from worlds he'd never visit, birds with 6 wings, something that looked like a cross between a bear and a coral reef. A herd of animals that seemed to be made of living crystal. "Beautiful," Marcus whispered. "Yes," Thelix agreed. "We preserve what would otherwise be lost. Many of these species come from dying worlds, or worlds where their natural habitats have been destroyed. Here, they are safe." They stopped at a large observation window. Inside, Marcus could see 3 small creatures playing together. They looked a bit like Earth's big cats, but with 6 legs and scales mixed in with their fur. Their teeth were clearly visible, sharp and white. They tumbled over each other, making chirping sounds. "The Krathnal cubs," Thelix said, and there was pride in his voice. "From Krath Prime. Their world is dying, the sun growing too hot. We saved these 3 from certain death. They are the only juveniles in captivity anywhere in the galaxy." Marcus watched the cubs play. "They're beautiful. How old are they?" 6 months in standard time. Still very young. Still very vulnerable." Thelix's scales seemed to darken slightly. "And very difficult to keep alive. We have lost many cubs before these 3. "What's the problem?" Marcus asked. Thelix gestured for Marcus to follow him to another window. This one looked into a storage area where Marcus could see what looked like a small zoo of living creatures. "The problem is their biology. Krathnal are apex predators. In the wild, they eat only fresh kill. Their digestive system requires specific enzymes that break down within hours of death. Feed them anything that isn't freshly killed, and they starve." Marcus frowned. "Enzymes that break down in hours? That's unusual." "Indeed. It has taken us decades to understand their needs. We must hunt live prey for them every single day. Sometimes twice a day if they're particularly active." Thelix's translator box made a sound that might have been a sigh. "It is exhausting work, but it is the only way." "What kind of prey?" Marcus asked. "Small mammals from our bioreserve. We maintain a breeding population specifically for this purpose. Come, I will show you." The bioreserve was impressive, a whole section of the station dedicated to maintaining populations of prey animals. Marcus saw dozens of species, all carefully monitored and rotated for hunting. It was like a working ecosystem, but controlled and managed. "Every morning and evening we conduct a hunt," Thelix explained. "One of us enters the reserve, captures appropriate prey, and delivers it fresh to the cubs. The entire process must be completed within 2 hours of death, or the cubs will not eat. Marcus watched through another window as a Varixen technician entered one of the reserve sections. The hunt was quick and efficient. The technician returned 10 minutes later carrying a small, furry creature. Marcus tried not to think about it too much. They returned to the cubs' habitat just as feeding time began. Marcus watched as Thelix opened a small door and placed the dead prey inside. The cubs immediately stopped playing. They approached the food carefully, sniffing it. Then the largest cub began to eat. The others waited their turn. They have a hierarchy, Thelix explained. The dominant cub eats first, then the others. It mirrors their behavior in the wild. How do you know all this about their wild behavior? Marcus asked. If they're so rare? Historical records, observations from before their world began dying. The Varixen have been studying predator species for thousands of years, Dr. Chen. We know what we are doing. There was something in Thelix's tone that made Marcus pause. It wasn't quite condescension, but it was close. A reminder that humans were new to all this, that they had a lot to learn. After the feeding, Thelix showed Marcus to his lab space and quarters. You will observe and assist for the first month, Thelix said. Learn our methods. The Varixen way of conservation has been refined over millennia. I think you will find it educational. I'm sure I will, Marcus said. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the cubs, about the complex system required just to feed them. It seemed inefficient, but Thelix and the others were so certain. They'd been doing this for centuries. Who was he to question? Still, something bothered him. The enzyme explanation didn't quite make sense. Enzymes were proteins. They could be preserved under the right conditions. He'd seen it in Earth species. Marcus pulled up his personal computer and began researching. He read everything he could find about Krathnal biology, about predator digestive systems, about the Varixen's methods. The more he read, the more questions he had. By morning, Marcus had a theory. It was probably wrong. The Varixen were experts, after all. But maybe, just maybe, there was something they'd missed, something that a fresh perspective might catch. He would need to be careful. He would need to be sure. But if he was right, it could change everything. Marcus spent his first week observing everything. He watched the daily hunts. He studied the cubs during feeding times and play times. He took notes on their behavior, their energy levels, the sounds they made. Every night he ran analyses on the data he collected. The cubs were fascinating creatures. They were smart, playful, and social. They had distinct personalities. The largest cub, which the staff called Apex, was bold and aggressive. The middle cub, named Shadow, was clever and cautious. The smallest, who they called Little, was gentle and often got pushed aside during feeding times. It was Little that worried Marcus most. The small cub was losing weight. It ate less than the others, intimidated by Apex's dominance. Thelix said this was natural, that in the wild, weaker cubs often died. Marcus hated that answer. On the 8th day, Marcus made his move. He asked Thelix if he could run some biochemical tests on the cubs' food. I want to understand the enzyme breakdown, he explained. It would help me learn. Thelix agreed, seeming pleased that Marcus wanted to learn their methods. Of course, use any equipment you need. Marcus worked for 3 days straight. He tested fresh prey. He tested prey that was 1 hour old, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. He ran every analysis he could think of. He compared the results to Earth predators, to other alien species he'd studied. The results were not what he expected. They were better. The enzymes the Varixen believed were essential existed, yes, but they weren't coming from the prey. The cubs' own stomachs were producing them in response to certain proteins in the meat, proteins that remained stable for days, even weeks, if properly preserved. Marcus ran the tests again to be sure. Same results. He checked his methodology, looked for errors. There were none. The data was clear. The Varixen had been wrong for centuries. Marcus prepared his findings carefully. He created charts and graphs. He wrote a simple explanation that anyone could understand. Then he requested a meeting with Thelix. They met in Thelix's office, a circular room with windows looking out at the stars. Marcus laid out his data on the table between them. "I've completed my analysis of the feeding process," Marcus began, "and I've found something interesting." Thelix leaned forward, interested. "Yes? The enzymes the cubs need? They're producing them themselves. The prey doesn't need to be fresh. It just needs to contain specific proteins, and those proteins are stable. We could feed them preserved meat. We could even feed them synthetic proteins if we formulated them correctly." Thelix's scales shifted color, darkening to a deep blue-black. "That's impossible." "It's not. Look at the data." Marcus pushed the charts forward. "I've run every test I can think of. The science is solid. On Earth, we've been feeding captive predators preserved meat for centuries. Lions, tigers, wolves, all apex predators. They thrive on it." "Earth predators are not Krathnal," Thelix said coldly. "No, but the biochemistry is similar. Look, I'm not saying we should change everything immediately. We could run a controlled test, feed one cub preserved meat for a week, see what happens." Thelix stood abruptly. "Absolutely not. You are suggesting we risk the life of an irreplaceable creature based on a week of research? We have centuries of experience with predator care. Centuries, Dr. Chen. The Varixen wrote the Galactic Standards for Conservation." "I understand that," Marcus said, trying to stay calm. "But science evolves. New techniques, new understanding. I'm not saying your methods are wrong, I'm saying maybe there's a better way." "A human way," Thelix said. And now the condescension was clear. "You've been in space for what, 50 years? We've been doing this for millennia. Your species still struggles with your own planetary conservation. You think you can improve on our methods?" Marcus felt his face getting hot. "That's not fair. I'm showing you data, not opinions. The evidence is right here." Evidence gathered in a few days by someone with minimal experience in xenobiology. Thelix's golden eyes were hard. "I will be honest, Dr. Chen. When humans were invited to join galactic conservation efforts, many of us were skeptical. We wondered if your species was ready. This conversation is confirming those doubts." That stung. Marcus gathered his papers. "Will you at least review my findings?" "I will add them to your file," Thelix said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual conservation work to do." Marcus left the office feeling angry and frustrated. He understood being cautious with the cubs' lives. He understood respecting experience. But Thelix hadn't even really looked at the data. He'd dismissed it because it came from a human. Over the next few days, Marcus tried talking to other staff members. He got similar reactions. Some were polite, but distant. Others were openly dismissive. One young Varixen researcher named Kessera seemed interested, but even she was hesitant. "It's not that I don't believe your research," Kessera explained quietly. "But challenging Thelix's methods means challenging centuries of Varixen doctrine. It's not just science, it's cultural, political." "But what if I'm right?" Marcus asked. "Then we've been wrong for a very long time," Kessera said. "That's a difficult thing for people to accept." Marcus threw himself into other work, trying to stay useful. He helped with habitat maintenance. He assisted with health checks on other species. He tried to be patient. But every day he watched the hunts continue. He watched the bioreserve animals being killed. He watched Little getting weaker. 2 weeks after his meeting with Thelix, Marcus was called to Ambassador Vrexall's office. The station director was older than Thelix, with scales that had faded to a pale silver. "Dr. Chen," Vrexall said, "I've heard you've been discussing alternative feeding methods with the staff." "I was sharing some research," Marcus said carefully. Research that contradicts our established protocols. Research that has upset several staff members. Vrexall's voice wasn't angry, just firm. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this station operates on proven methods. I cannot have you undermining confidence in our procedures. I'm not trying to undermine anything, Marcus protested. I'm trying to help. Then help by learning from us. Observe. Assist. That is why you are here. Vrexall fixed him with a steady gaze. You are restricted to observational duties only. No more testing. No more proposing changes. Am I clear? Yes, Ambassador, Marcus said quietly. That night, Marcus sat in his quarters and stared at his data. He was right. He knew he was right, but no one would listen. No one would even try. In the habitat down the hall, Little was still losing weight. The daily hunts continued, draining the bioreserve faster than it could recover, and everyone just accepted it because that's how it had always been done. Marcus thought about home, about human history, about all the times people had clung to old ideas even when better ones existed. It was frustrating to see it happening on a galactic scale. He pulled up images of the cubs on his computer. They were beautiful creatures. They deserved better than this. They deserved to thrive, not just survive. Marcus made a decision then. It was probably a terrible idea. It might get him thrown off the station, but he couldn't just watch anymore. He would prove he was right, even if he had to do it alone. The emergency alarm woke Marcus from a restless sleep. Red lights flashed in his quarters as the station's automated voice announced a containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel were to report immediately to seal off the affected areas. Marcus jumped out of bed and rushed into the corridor. Other crew members were already running past, headed for the emergency stations. He followed them, his heart pounding. Containment breaches were serious. Some of the creatures on the station were dangerous if they got loose. It took 2 hours to get the situation under control. A large herbivore had damaged its habitat wall, creating a crack. No creatures had escaped, but the entire sector had to be evacuated and sealed while repairs were made. Marcus helped carry equipment and hold pressure seals while the Varixen engineers worked. When it was finally over, Marcus was exhausted. He headed back to his quarters, covered in sweat and ready to collapse. Then he passed the observation window for the cubs' habitat. He stopped. The habitat was empty. No staff members were visible anywhere. They must all still be dealing with the emergency in Sector 7. Marcus checked his communicator. It was past midnight, station time. The cubs should have been fed hours ago, but with the emergency, their evening feeding had obviously been delayed. He could see them huddled together in the corner, making soft, unhappy sounds. He looked closer and felt his stomach drop. Little was lying very still. The small cub's breathing was shallow. Its eyes were half closed. Marcus pressed his hand against the glass. "Hold on," he whispered. He looked around. The corridor was empty. Everyone was still in Sector 7 or resting after the emergency. The next scheduled feeding wouldn't happen for at least 6 more hours, and Little didn't have 6 hours. Marcus made his decision in seconds. He ran to his quarters and grabbed his personal food supplies. His hands shook as he dug through the box. Most of it was dried rations, protein bars, things that wouldn't work. Then his fingers closed around a tin can. Tuna fish. He'd brought it from Earth as a comfort food, something to remind him of home. It was preserved. It was protein. It was worth a try. Marcus ran back to the habitat. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the feeding port controls. The port was designed to let staff place food inside without entering the habitat. It had multiple locks and safety protocols. Marcus bypassed them all, his fingers flying over the control panel. He'd watched the staff do this dozens of times. The inner door opened. Marcus pulled the tab on the tin can, and the smell of fish filled the air. He scooped some of the tuna into the feeding tray and pushed it through. Then he sealed the port and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Marcus held his breath. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe this wouldn't work. Maybe he'd just wasted crucial time. Then Little's head lifted. The cub's nostrils flared. It pulled itself to its feet, swaying slightly. The other two cubs noticed and came closer, curious. Little reached the feeding tray first and sniffed deeply. Marcus could see its whole body trembling. Then the cub's tongue darted out, tasting the tuna. Little began to eat. Marcus almost shouted in relief. He clapped his hand over his mouth to stay quiet. Little ate slowly at first, then with more energy. The other two cubs crowded in, trying to get some too. Marcus quickly opened another can and added more tuna to the tray. All three cubs ate. They made soft, chirping sounds, the same sounds they made when they were content after a normal feeding. Their tails moved in slow, happy waves. Marcus pulled out his personal scanner and took readings through the habitat window. Heart rates, thermal signatures, stress hormones. He documented everything. His hands were still shaking, but now it was from excitement rather than fear. The cubs finished eating and wandered back to their sleeping area. They seemed more energetic than Marcus had seen them in days. Little especially seemed brighter, more alert. The small cub even played briefly with Shadow before they all settled down to rest. Marcus cleaned up the evidence as best he could. He sealed the empty cans in a disposal bag and hid them in his quarters. Then he sat in front of his computer and transferred all his scanner readings to his personal drive. He organized them, added notes, created charts. The data was beautiful. Every metric was good, better than good. The cubs were responding exactly as he'd predicted, but he couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. One feeding wasn't proof. It could be a fluke. He needed more data, more time. Over the next week, Marcus found 3 more opportunities to feed the cubs. Once during a shift change when the corridors were empty. Once during a scheduled maintenance period when the habitat cameras were offline. Once late at night when he was supposedly alone in the lab. Each time, he used different preserved foods from his personal supplies. Canned chicken, dried fish, even some of the protein rations, rehydrated and mixed with oil. The cubs ate everything. Their health metrics continued to improve. Little gained weight. Its coat became shinier. It started to stand up to Apex during playtime. Shadow became more active, exploring every corner of the habitat. Even Apex seemed calmer, less aggressive. The staff noticed. Thelix commented on it during a team meeting. "The cubs are thriving," he said, sounding pleased. "Our feeding protocols are clearly working well. The crisis with Little seems to have resolved on its own." Marcus said nothing. He just took notes and tried not to smile. But he was running out of food. His personal supplies were nearly gone. He had maybe 3 more feedings worth, and then he'd have to stop. He needed to tell someone. He needed to share what he'd learned. The problem was proof. He had data, yes, but it was data collected in secret, without authorization. If he revealed what he'd done, he'd be in serious trouble. Feeding the cubs unauthorized food could be considered endangering their lives. The Varixen took their conservation responsibilities very seriously. Marcus lay awake at night, wrestling with the decision. Every day he waited, the cubs got healthier. Every day he waited, the bioreserve got more depleted from the daily hunts. Every day he waited, more prey animals died unnecessarily. Then Little solved the problem for him. Marcus was in the observation corridor late one evening, watching the cubs settle down for sleep. He'd just fed them the last of his canned chicken an hour before. They were content and full, grooming each other lazily. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Marcus turned to see Kessera, the young researcher who'd shown interest in his theories. She was carrying a tablet and looked surprised to see him. "Dr. Chen, what are you doing here so late?" "Just observing," Marcus said quickly. "I couldn't sleep." Kessera looked at the cubs, then at her tablet, then back at the cubs. Her scales shifted to a puzzled yellow-green. That's strange. What is? The feeding logs show the cubs received their evening meal 4 hours ago, but their digestive activity readings suggest they ate much more recently. Within the last hour, actually. Kesra looked at Marcus. That shouldn't be possible. Marcus felt his heart start to pound. He'd been so careful with the health monitors, but he'd forgotten about the digestive tracking systems. Stupid. So stupid. Kesra's eyes narrowed. She looked at Marcus, then at the cubs, then at the feeding port. Dr. Chen, have you been feeding these cubs? Marcus could lie. He could make up an excuse. He could run. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, Yes, I have, and I can prove that everything the Varixen believe about their dietary needs is wrong. Kesra stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, Show me everything. Marcus spent the entire night showing Kesra everything, every data point he'd collected, every feeding he'd done, every health improvement he'd documented. They sat in his quarters surrounded by charts and graphs while the station cycled through its artificial night. Kesra studied it all in silence. Her scales kept shifting colors, cycling through shades Marcus had learned meant she was thinking hard. Finally, as artificial dawn began lighting the corridors, she spoke. This data is solid, she said quietly. If this is accurate, you've disproven centuries of Varixen conservation theory. It's accurate, Marcus said. He was exhausted, but running on nervous energy. I've triple-checked everything. The cubs don't need fresh kill. They never did. Do you understand what this means? Kesra's scales had turned a worried gray. If you're right, our entire feeding program has been based on false assumptions. The Varixen Conservation Council, our reputation, everything we've built, it all comes into question. I know, Marcus said. That's why I need help. If I come forward alone, they'll dismiss it. But if you support the findings, they'll still dismiss it, Kesra interrupted. And they'll exile me for supporting a human over Varixen expertise. She paused. But they might actually look at the data first. Marcus felt a surge of hope. You'll help me? I'll present your findings to the senior staff. But Dr. Chen, you need to understand. What you did was dangerous. You fed the cubs unauthorized substances. You could have killed them. But I didn't. They're healthier than ever. I know, but that won't matter to Thelix. Or Ambassador Vrexall. You broke protocol. You went behind everyone's backs. They're going to be furious. Kesra met his eyes. This is going to get very bad before it gets better. If it gets better. She was right. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, and it was a disaster from the start. They met in the main conference room. Ambassador Vrexall sat at the head of the table. Thelix sat on one side, his scales already darkened to an angry blue-black. Other senior staff members filled the remaining seats. Marcus and Kesra stood at the front like students called to the principal's office. Kesra presented the findings. She was professional, clear, and thorough. She showed the health data. She explained the biochemistry. She demonstrated how Marcus's theory aligned with known facts about protein stability and enzyme production. Before she could finish, Thelix slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. You're telling us that a human with weeks of experience secretly fed our cubs unauthorized food that could have killed them? But it didn't kill them, Marcus said. It saved Little's life. Look at the data. I don't care about your data. Thelix's voice was loud enough to make Marcus step back. You endangered irreplaceable creatures because you thought you knew better than experts who have been doing this for centuries. I followed the science, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. The science you were too proud to look at. Too proud? Thelix stood up. We have successfully maintained apex predators for millennia. We have protocols that work, protocols developed through careful research and tragic failures. And you, in your arrogance, decided all of that was wrong? It is wrong, Marcus shot back. Your protocols are based on assumptions, not evidence. You've been killing prey animals unnecessarily for decades because no one wanted to question the old ways. Ambassador Vrexall raised a hand. Enough, both of you. The room went silent. Vrexall looked tired. Dr. Chen, what you did was a serious violation of station protocols. Regardless of your intentions, you put the cubs at risk. With respect, Ambassador, I didn't put them at risk. Your protocols did. Little was dying because your feeding schedule couldn't keep up. I saved its life. You got lucky, Thelix said coldly. What if you'd been wrong? What if the cubs had rejected the food? What if they'd gotten sick? Then I would have called for help immediately. I wasn't being reckless. I was being careful. I monitored everything. Marcus pulled up his data on the conference room display. Look, heart rate, digestive function, stress hormones, all of it. Everything improved. The science doesn't lie. One of the older researchers, a Varixen named Telmon, leaned forward. The data does appear consistent with his claims. It could be falsified, Thelix said. I didn't falsify anything. Marcus felt his face getting hot. Why would I risk my career, risk these cubs' lives, just to fake some data? To prove humans are superior, Thelix suggested. To embarrass the Varixen? To save lives, Marcus shouted. That's all I wanted to do. Save the cubs. Save the prey animals. Make things better. The room erupted in argument. Some staff members supported Thelix. Others seemed interested in Marcus's data. Kessera tried to mediate, but no one was listening to her. Finally, Ambassador Vrexall stood. The room fell silent again. This debate is pointless. There is only one way to resolve this. We will conduct a controlled test. Thelix's scales paled. Ambassador, you cannot be serious. I am completely serious. If Dr. Chen is correct, this discovery could revolutionize conservation across the galaxy. If he is wrong, we need to know definitively so we can prevent others from making the same mistake. Vrexall looked at Marcus. We will select one cub. For 1 week, that cub will be fed only preserved food prepared according to Dr. Chen's specifications. The other 2 will continue on our standard protocol. All 3 will be monitored constantly. And if something goes wrong, Thelix demanded, then we will intervene immediately. We have medical staff on standby at all times. Vrexall's gaze was stern. But Dr. Chen, understand this. If your theory fails, if that cub shows any signs of distress, you will be removed from this station permanently. You will be reported to the Human Scientific Council for gross negligence. Your career in xenobiology will be over. Marcus swallowed hard. I understand. And if he's right? Kessera asked quietly. Vrexall was silent for a moment. Then the Varixen will have much to reconsider. Telmon, you will supervise the test, monitor everything. I want hourly reports. The next 7 days were the longest of Marcus's life. They selected Shadow for the test, as the middle cub was healthy and stable. Neither the strongest nor weakest. Marcus prepared the preserved food himself, using station supplies under Telmon's supervision. Fish protein, properly sealed and stored. It was similar to what he'd fed them before, but more carefully formulated. The first feeding was watched by half the station staff. Shadow sniffed the food suspiciously, while everyone held their breath. Then the cub began to eat. By day 3, the differences were becoming clear. Shadow was just as active and healthy as the other cubs. Its coat was glossy, its eyes were bright. It played, slept, and groomed normally. By day 5, something unexpected happened. Shadow was gaining weight faster than the others. Its energy levels were actually higher. Telmon checked the readings 3 times to make sure the equipment wasn't malfunctioning. How is this possible? Thelix muttered, staring at the data. Because the preserved food is more nutritionally consistent, Marcus explained. Fresh prey varies in quality depending on the individual animal's health, diet, stress levels. Preserved food can be optimized for perfect nutrition every time. On day 7, Telmon presented his final report. Shadow was not just healthy. Shadow was thriving better than either of the other cubs. Every single health metric was equal to or better than the fresh-fed cubs. The conference room was silent as Telmon displayed his findings. Even Thelix had nothing to say. Finally, Ambassador Vrexall spoke. Dr. Chen, it appears you were correct. On behalf of the station, I apologize for doubting your research. Marcus felt like he might collapse from relief. Thank you, Ambassador. Thelix stood stiffly. If you'll excuse me, I need to review our protocols. He left without looking at anyone. Later that evening, Marcus stood at the observation window watching all 3 cubs play together. They would all be on the new feeding protocol starting tomorrow. No more daily hunts, no more stress, just healthy, happy cubs. Kessera found him there. You did it, she said. We did it, Marcus corrected. I couldn't have done this without your help. The other stations are already asking for details, Kessera said. Word travels fast. This is going to change everything. Marcus watched Little pounce on Shadow, both cubs tumbling together. Good, he said softly. It should. The news spread across the galaxy faster than Marcus could have imagined. Within 2 weeks, conservation stations from dozens of worlds were requesting copies of his research. Within a month, the Galactic Conservation Council had called an emergency session to review feeding protocols for all predator species. Marcus suddenly found himself famous, and he wasn't sure he liked it. He received messages from scientists he'd only read about in textbooks. News services wanted interviews. The Human Scientific Council sent a congratulatory message that was probably meant to be supportive, but mostly made him feel pressured. Through it all, the cubs continued to thrive. All 3 were now on the preserved food protocol full-time. The daily hunts had stopped. The bioreserve was recovering, its animal populations growing back to healthy levels. The staff had more time to dedicate to other species. It should have felt like victory. But Marcus could see the strain it put on the Varixen staff, especially the older ones. They smiled and congratulated him, but their scales told a different story. Embarrassment, uncertainty, loss. One evening, Marcus found Thelix in the bioreserve. The older Varixen was sitting on a bench watching a herd of small mammals graze peacefully, animals that would have been prey a month ago. May I sit? Marcus asked. Thelix gestured to the bench without speaking. They sat in silence for a while. I wanted to apologize, Marcus finally said. Not for being right, but for how I went about it. I should have found a better way to prove my theory. A way that didn't make you feel undermined. Thelix was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he wouldn't respond. Then he said, I have been a conservator for 43 years. I have dedicated my entire life to protecting species that cannot protect themselves. I thought I knew everything there was to know about predator care. You know a lot, Marcus said. Your techniques for habitat management, for social group dynamics, for medical care, they're brilliant. I learned more from you in a month than I learned in years of school. But I was wrong about the most basic thing, feeding. Thelix's scales shifted to a dull gray. Do you know how many prey animals I killed over the years? Tens of thousands, maybe more, all unnecessarily. You didn't know, Marcus said gently. You were following the best information you had. That's what makes it worse. We were so certain, so sure of ourselves. We built an entire philosophy of conservation around assumptions we never properly tested. Thelix looked at Marcus. Why didn't we see it? We're supposed to be the experts. Marcus thought carefully about his answer. Maybe that's exactly why you didn't see it. You were too close to it. You'd been doing it one way for so long that it became truth instead of theory. Sometimes you need someone from outside to ask the stupid questions. It wasn't a stupid question. It felt stupid to ask at the time. Everyone looked at me like I was crazy. Marcus smiled slightly. Maybe being new to something is an advantage sometimes. I didn't know what was supposed to be impossible, so I didn't know not to try. Thelix made a sound that might have been a laugh. The Varixen pride themselves on wisdom and experience. It's humbling to learn that sometimes ignorance is more valuable. Not ignorance, Marcus said. Fresh perspective. And for what it's worth, I couldn't have done any of this without Varixen science. Your medical monitors, your behavioral research, your equipment. I stood on your shoulders to see what I saw. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the animals. I have been asked to co-author a new protocol guide with you, Thelix said eventually. For feeding captive predators, the Council wants to combine Varixen experience with human innovation. I'd be honored, Marcus said. I really would learn from your expertise. And I from yours. Thelix's scales shifted to a lighter, more peaceful blue. Perhaps that is how it should be. Not one species having all the answers, but all species contributing what they know. The work began immediately. Marcus and Thelix spent hours every day developing new protocols. They tested different preservation methods. They studied which proteins were most important for different predator species. They created storage guidelines and preparation techniques. Kessera joined their team, bringing her knowledge of nutritional biochemistry. Telmon contributed his expertise in health monitoring. Soon they had researchers from other species joining video calls, adding their own perspectives. A Kryn nutritionist, a human veterinarian, a Zythian biochemist. The final protocol guide was a truly collaborative work. It had chapters on human preservation techniques, Varixen behavioral insights, Kryn nutritional science, and more. It was better than anything any single species could have created alone. When they presented it to the Galactic Conservation Council, the response was overwhelming. Stations across the galaxy began implementing the new protocols. Species that had been considered too difficult to maintain in captivity were suddenly viable for conservation programs. A research station near the Andromeda border reported successfully feeding a group of endangered predators that had been thought to require live prey hunted under moonlight. Turned out they just needed their food at a certain temperature. A conservation world in the Crab Nebula discovered they could finally support a species everyone had given up on. The breakthrough came from combining Marcus's preservation techniques with Varixen habitat design and Kryn nutritional supplements. The Crathnal cubs were growing fast. Apex was already twice the size it had been when Marcus arrived. Shadow had become bold and playful. Little, the cub that had almost died, was now the most active of the three, constantly exploring and getting into mischief. Ambassador Vrexall announced they would soon be ready for transfer to a protected preserve on a terraformed world. There they would join other Crathnal rescued from their dying home planet. Maybe someday there would be enough of them to consider reintroduction to a new world. On Marcus's last day at the station, before his transfer to his next assignment, the entire staff gathered for a ceremony. Ambassador Vrexall presented him with a crystal sculpture, a traditional Varixen honor for significant contributions to conservation. Dr. Chen, Vrexall said formally, you came to us as a student and taught us instead. You challenged our certainty and made us better scientists. On behalf of the Varixen people and the Galactic Conservation Council, thank you. Marcus accepted the crystal, feeling overwhelmed. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Thank you for being willing to listen. Eventually. That got a laugh from the crowd. Afterwards, Marcus stood at the observation window one last time, watching the cubs. Thelix joined him there. Your next assignment is studying the Vortac, correct? Thelix asked. The species that supposedly requires an ammonia atmosphere? That's right, Marcus said. Everyone says it's impossible to study them without specialized facilities. And you're going to prove them wrong? Marcus grinned. I'm going to ask stupid questions until I figure out what everyone's assuming that they shouldn't be. Thelix's scales shifted to an amused yellow-green. The galaxy should prepare itself. If humans are going to question everything we thought we knew, we're in for interesting times. Is that a bad thing? No, Thelix said thoughtfully. I don't think it is. Change is uncomfortable. Being wrong is humbling, but both are necessary for growth. He turned to Marcus. I was angry with you for a long time. Angry that you were right, angry that I was wrong. But now I'm grateful. You reminded me that science isn't about protecting what we think we know. It's about discovering what we don't know yet. Even if it means questioning everything? Especially then. They watched the cubs play in silence. Then Thelix said quietly, Safe travels, Dr. Chen. And when you prove everyone wrong about the Vortac, send me the data. I promise to look at it with an open mind. I will, Marcus said. As his transport ship pulled away from the station the next day, Marcus looked back at the structure floating against the backdrop of Thessera Prime. Somewhere in there, 3 cubs were eating their dinner from tin cans. They were healthy and happy and growing strong. The galaxy had been so certain about what those cubs needed, so sure that fresh kill was the only option, so convinced that thousands of years of tradition couldn't be wrong. One human with a tin can had changed all that. Marcus smiled and pulled out his tablet. He had reading to do about ammonia-based life forms. Everyone said they were impossible to keep in standard conditions. Everyone was probably wrong. He couldn't wait to find out why. The galaxy was full of impossible things waiting to be proven possible. All it took was someone willing to ask the stupid questions, someone willing to challenge what everyone knew to be true, someone with fresh eyes, a curious mind, and maybe a tin can or two,